Hey everyone, another day, another handheld, with this one being the O3 OS. The O3 OS is a handheld that seems to be heavily inspired by Aminic's RG351 handhelds from yesteryear, sporting the same spec 3.5-inch screen, the same RK3326 chip, and no inbuilt Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, but does have some changes that make it stand out, like its stacked shoulder buttons. The O3 OS comes in at around the $40 to $50 mark, depending on what promotions are running at the time. So let's get stuck in. In terms of specs, the O3 OS is powered by the ROC chip 3326. That will give the O3 OS the ability to play some, but far from all, of the Dreamcast and PSP catalogues. We also have 1GB of RAM, a 2.5-inch IPS display with a resolution of 640 by 480, a pretty respectable 3000 mAh battery, and the great ArcOS Linux firmware straight out the box, with a pretty light weight of 188 grams too. Straight out of the box, the O3 OS looks and feels very similar to what it is in my mind, in that it's a budget handheld imitating an Ambinic. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and in many ways makes it feel a bit more substantial compared to other budget handhelds out there, with a design profile that's quite clean overall. On top, we've got the volume, reset and power buttons, while underneath 2 microSD card slots and USB-C ports, a headphone jack and the inconveniently placed speaker grills, and that's pretty much it. So, a few minor points here and there, but overall not too bad. Jumping into the controls, the O3 OS isn't horrendous, but could do a lot better. The face buttons feel a bit hollow and don't have the most textural feel to them, but are otherwise surprisingly responsive and not too bad buttons. They're able to handle precision presses and button mashing alike. The shoulder buttons are slightly too thin, with dead areas around the edges, but are relatively quiet, and assuming you're not positioned around those edges, aren't too bad in terms of shoulder buttons. The triggers, they do feel good to press, but snap back against the plastic shell with a little bit too much force, which ultimately makes for responsive but loud button presses. It may not be the quietest, but it's still far better than the crunchy shoulder buttons that we've seen on some of these clone handhelds. The joysticks are your typical Switch-like sticks for all the good and for worse that brings, but the dpad, unfortunately, is absolutely terrible. It sinks far too easily into the case and has no real pivot to speak of, which makes for its actual uncomfortable play during multi-directional inputs, which is a huge shame. If it wasn't for this D-pad, the O3 OS controls would have been a pretty decent setup overall, but unfortunately that D-pad does bring the overall controls down. Thankfully, it doesn't outright ruin them, but it's definitely the type of D-pad that I don't like to see. Switching over to the firmware, the O3 OS comes shipped with the ArcOS Linux-based firmware, which we've seen multiple times on the channel, and overall it's a great firmware option to have. Everything's pre-configured relatively well, all well enough for pick up and play gameplay, but the lack of the occasional BIOS and the odd config choice stops the out-of-the-box experience from being perfect. It's also worth noting that we don't have Wi-Fi, so retro achievements and the like won't be available without a dongle. So let's cut some gameplay footage now before summarising back up at the end. So ultimately, the O3OS isn't a terrible budget handheld. The shell design mostly makes sense, the screen's not bad at all, and the only real substantial negative is the terrible D-pad. We've seen a lot worse on the channel, and though it's a huge shame that the O3OS has gotten so close to being a great option. That's it for now though, thanks so much for watching.